From swimming in poop to catching leeches with your bare legs. These are the worst jobs in human history. It's 16th century London. You just had a big meal, very unlikely given you are a peasant. Anyway, you go to the bathroom and you're greeted with this, a fancy hole in the ground. There were no flush toilets back then, as the first flush toilet wouldn't be invented until 1775 by Alexander Cummins and later refined in 1850 by Thomas Crabber. Yeah, his name was Crabber. So you have to make do with what you got for now. You go on and destroy the bathroom, but now where does all the waste go? It gets funneled straight into a cesspit under your home. They stay there for months, maybe years, festering away beneath your floorboards. And when these bits filled up, some poor soul had the job of emptying them. And this is the job of the gong farmer. Gong was just the polite word for the toilet and its contents. It's derived from Old English gang, which means to go. Gong farmers were also known as nightmen, because they were only allowed to work after dark by royal decree. The smell was considered too nasty for daylight hours. Plus, no one wanted carts full of poop rolling through town during the lunch break. So what a day in the life of a gong farmer looked like. These unfortunate souls would climb down into the cesspits with nothing but a shovel and a bucket. They would scoop the accumulated waste of dozens of people and haul it to the surface bucket by bucket. Sometimes these pits were so narrow that they had to employ young boys to get the waste out. Now you're left with all this waste, and there are only two accepted methods to get rid of it. You either spread it on farmlands as a fertilizer, or transfer it to designated areas at the edge of the town. Not following one of these two methods could get you in some serious trouble. If you thought you could just toss under the bridge and call it a day, one gong farmer was stuffed into a tube and covered in poop before being publicly displayed for doing just that. Their profession, while absolutely disgusting and genuinely dangerous, was essential. Somehow, they had to get rid of all this waste. That's why they got paid pretty well for all the troubles and all the crap they had to endure. But despite being well rewarded and it being an essential job, they were permitted to live only in specified areas in isolated communities, far from everyone else. As you might have expected, they were social outcasts, marked by their profession and the stench that never quite washed away. Shocking news. The folks who spend their day elbow deep in human waste weren't exactly society's favorite dinner guests. Our second job is groom of the stool, another one that involves dealing with poop, but this one was more fancy and respectable. The groom of the stool was in charge of helping the king with his bathroom routine. That meant assisting him take the 100 layers of clothes off and keeping him company during his most private moments, so he doesn't get bored. There were no YouTube or TikTok back then. The name Groom of the Stool came from the toilet that the king used, the clothes stool, a fancy portable toilet in the shape of a chair or a box, with a hole in the top and a chamber pot hidden inside to collect his royal feces. I don't think using velvet hair is a good idea. Being this close to the king during his most vulnerable time came with a lot of power and influence. He was more than just a servant, often seen as a close confidant of the king, able to chat with him about different topics, offer counsel, and ask him for favors, not just for himself, but on behalf of others. And it was not a job anyone could get, only those with strong connection and a noble lineage, families who wanted to get more close to the crown. That's why, despite how gross and weird it sounds, this job was actually considered a respectable and desirable position. Honestly, I almost didn't include it in this list. They were knights, while their duty was wiping the king's butt, but still knights. Over time, and especially during the reign of Henry VII, the role evolved into a more administrative one, with many responsibilities, including managing the king's private finances and overseeing access to the king. The job eventually disappeared, with Sir Michael Stanhope being the last person to hold the title. He served King Edward VI in 1547. The disappearance was partly due to the fact that the job mainly served male monarchs, and with the rise of Mary I and later Elizabeth I to the crown, the job was replaced by the First Lady of the Bedchamber, first held by Cat Ashley. The job later returned but with a different name and different responsibilities. As the structure of the royal court changed, intimate rules like the groom of the stool started to lose relevance. Now back to the real shitty jobs. We're now in Victorian London. You're walking your dog and enjoying the one day a year when the weather is somewhat good. Suddenly you feel someone is following you. What does he want? Why is he stalking you? You look behind and he's picking your dog poo. Is it some type of a collecting hobby? Well, he's doing his job. More precisely, the job of the pure finder. And what a clean sounding name. Finally, we're now not dealing with human waste, but animal one. People whose entire livelihood depended on collecting canine waste from the streets. Turns out, lizard tanners discovered that dog feces contained enzymes perfect for something called baiting leather, a process that softened and purified the hides. And the pure finder job was to collect it from the streets. They would patrol the streets from dawn with just one goal: collecting as much dog poop as possible, using sticks or most of the time their bare hands. The English journalist Henry Mayhew documented this unusual trade in his book London Labour and the London Poor. He wrote, "The pure finder is often found in the open streets, as dogs wander, always carrying a handle basket, generally with a cover, to hide the contents. With a black leather glove, many of them dispense with the glove. As they say, it's much easier to wash their hands than to keep the glove fit for use. Yeah, they prefer to get their hands dirty." Pure finding in Victorian London initially offered decent pay. However, as many people got into the trade, the market became flooded that leather makers could cut their prices way down. Some old school Moroccan tanneries still use cow urine and pigeon poop in their leather making process, like the Chouara tannery in Fez, which dates back to the 11th century. If you went there for a tour, they would often give you a bunch of mint leaves to hold under your nose. Now let's shift gears from dealing with poop. The video probably smells awful by now. Let's talk about something darker. By the 18th and early 19th century, medical science was advancing very fast, and doctors in training needed to learn human anatomy. Just one tiny problem: where do you get the bodies? The only legal source of cadavers at the time was executed criminals. If you committed a serious enough crime, not only would you be hanged, but your body would end up on the dissection table. That seems reasonable and supplied the medical schools with the bodies they needed for a while. But with more medical schools, they needed more bodies. There simply weren't enough executed criminals to meet the demand. I mean, that's generally a good thing, but this created a serious supply and demand issue for medical schools. They needed more bodies to study and dissect, and the bodies of the criminals were not enough. That's when a job with a really cool name was born: the resurrectionist. Sounds like a Marvel superhero. It was also more commonly known as the body snatcher. Their job description was simple. They had to sneak into the cemetery, get the bodies, and transfer it to medical schools. They operated in teams. Some were scout locations. These guys would actually attend the funerals, pretending to mourn while secretly noting the location of the fresh grave and checking out how tight the security was at the cemetery. They were standing at the funeral, dabbing their eyes with a napkin, while thinking, this one looks promising for tonight. Once they identified a target, they would wait for darkness. Around midnight, they would dig just the head of the grave, just enough to expose the top of the coffin. They would break open just the head end of the coffin, pull the body out with the rope through the small opening, then carefully replace the dirt to hide any evidence. The most skilled teams could complete the entire process in under 30 minutes. By morning, the grave would look completely undisturbed, except for the now empty coffin buried below. Family members visiting the next day would have no idea their loved one was already lying on a dissection table across the town. Body snatchers didn't technically commit a crime. As strange as it seems, a dead body belonged to no one. Taking the shroud or the clothing was theft, but the body itself was fair game. This grim business was incredibly lucrative. At the height of demand in London, a single fresh adult body could sell for up to 30 pounds. The fresher the body, the higher the price. Even medical students supplemented their income by snatching bodies themselves, learning anatomy during the day, and then digging up graves at night to help pay for the tuition. The shortage of bodies became so acute that it eventually crossed the line from just grave robbing to murder. The most famous case was the one of William Burke and William Hare in Edinburgh, who killed 16 people in 1828 to sell their bodies to anatomist Dr. Robert Knox. They targeted people who had no one and wouldn't be missed: the elderly, prostitutes, and transients. Their method was to get the victims drunk and then suffocate them, leaving no marks on the body. That method later became known as Burking. With all of this, the horrors of the body snatching and the murders, the authorities had to act, and they ultimately pushed to find the legal solution. That was the Anatomy Act of 1832, that finally made it easier to get bodies legally by letting doctors use unclaimed bodies from workhouses, hospitals, and prisons. Speaking of medical practice from the past, here is another contender for history's worst occupation. Imagine you're in the Middle Ages. You've got a raging fever, you're sweating buckets, and you finally drag yourself to your local doctor, who also happens to be your barber. His first treatment plan is the most well-known treatment at the time: bloodletting. In other words, sucking the bad blood out of you. Back then, pretty much everything was blamed on bad blood. You have a fever, bad blood. Sadness, bad blood. Broken bones, somehow also bad blood. It was considered the magic cure for nearly everything. This practice started with Egyptians over 3,000 years ago. Then it found its way to the Greeks and the Romans, and by the Middle Ages, bloodletting had gone viral across Europe. One of the methods used for this was using live leeches. These little suckers could ingest 5 to 10 millimeters of blood in one go, about 5 to 10 times their own body weight. By the 1830s, leeches were in such high demand, and European doctors were using hundreds of thousands of them every year. But all of this blood sucking required a steady supply, which led to one of the most disturbing and unusual jobs: the leech collector. Leech collectors were primarily women, and their method was as simple as it was painful. They would wade into swampy, leech-infested waters with their bare legs exposed, literally offering themselves as bait. Once the leeches latched on and started feeding, the collectors would gently remove them and drop them into a small container tied to her waist. A successful day meant dozens of bloated leeches, each filled with the collector's own blood. And needless to say, this job took a serious physical toll. Many collectors suffered from chronic blood loss, developed anemia, and walked around with pale skin and scarred legs as a permanent reminder of their work. Eventually, in the late 19th century, the leech market dried up as medical science advanced and doctors finally realized that draining a sick person's blood probably wasn't helping him recover. We've made it to the last job on the list, one that 19th century Europe desperately needed and probably still does. Rats were always a problem in Europe, and before any modern pest control, and with the rapid development and expansions, the little guys had a good time with the huge piles of waste, and that's why the job of the rat catcher was an essential one. They took it upon themselves to hunt the little troublemakers. These unsung heroes were hired to keep cities from being overrun with rats, especially when deadly sicknesses like the plague were going around. They often used small, quick dogs like terriers, trained on the smell of the rats to be able to hunt them quickly. And somehow, rat catching became closely linked to gambling through a cruel sport called rat baiting, because we humans love gambling. The contests would happen in bars where they would put 2 terriers in a pit full of rats. People would bet money on which dog could kill the most rats the quickest, and rat catchers found a way to cash in on this bloody entertainment. They would supply the dozens or even thousands of rats needed for these matches. Not just that, many also trained and sold the special terriers used in this competition. It was a whole side gig that could make them more money than their regular work. The most famous rat catcher was Jack Black. No, not this one. This Jack Black was Queen Victoria's personal rat catcher, and he claimed to have killed over 4,000 rats in a single day. Whether this is true or not, he knew how to market himself. Like most rat catchers back then, he cooked up his own rat poisons in the kitchen, throwing together arsenic and all sorts of chemicals, mixing this deadly stuff with his bare hands. Many of them ended up with blurry vision, breathing problems, or worse, thanks to years of toxic fumes and hanging out with rats for a living. History is backed with miserable jobs, and while times have changed, there are still people doing tough, thankless work just to put food on the table. And there are maybe even worse jobs than these in the video, but I tried to focus on the weird ones. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed it, you know what to do.